Cool. So we'll get started. Good evening. My name is Alan Oster. I am the co-chair of the Arts, Culture, Education, and Street Life Committee, also known as ACES, of Community Board 4, representing Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen neighborhoods in Manhattan. Along with my co-chair, Kit Tollison, and the members of the ACES committee, we want to thank you for attending tonight's regularly scheduled monthly meeting being held in accordance with the governor's executive order during this pandemic. This meeting will be recorded and can be viewed on the CB4 YouTube page. Tonight's agenda is a panel discussion on the New York City Department of Education admission policy changes and the racial disparities in New York City public school system. The panelists and speakers will be viewed. The chat function is not being used tonight, so please send your questions through the Q&A function found at the bottom of your screen. The public will not be called on for questions or comments tonight. For those of you who may not be familiar with community boards, a few moments for that, please. We are local organizations composed of 50 volunteer members representing our communities in New York City, working to enhance and preserve the character of our unique neighborhoods. Our primary responsibilities are to monitor the delivery of city services, review applications for development and zoning changes, and make annual budget requests to fund our city agencies. In addition, our standing committees review applications for liquor licenses, sidewalk cafes, street fairs, and development for additional city parks and green spaces. Over the past years, the ACES committee, working with Department of Education and the office of our district council member, City Council Speaker Corey Johnson, we have advocated for more social services, obtained additional resources for tech supplies, and building improvements for schools in Community Board 4. In addition, we have mediated construction concerns between the school construction authority and the communities impacted by ongoing construction. Tonight, the ACES committee is presenting another in its series of educational forums to provide and discuss important information affecting families whose children attend New York City public schools. Our two topics tonight include the changes to the admission policies for middle schools and high schools, and also the racial disparity that exists in New York City schools and what efforts have been made to address this issue in District 2. An issue that has garnered considerable attention. The Gifted and Talented program will not be part of this particular forum, but we hope to address this important topic at a future time. Through this forum, we hope to answer your questions regarding the admission process, help families understand the need for these policy changes, and begin a more open discussion on the effects that racial disparity has on all students. Going forward, the committee will be writing to our electeds regarding the concerns and questions expressed tonight and our position on these issues. We also hope to use this information in future forums. Turning now to our forum, I'm pleased to introduce Sadye Campoamor, New York City Department of Education, Director of Community Affairs and Special Assistant to the Chancellor.
Sadye, can I, before we start, just for the ACES members, a number of ACES members who are not moderating this panel tonight have actually asked to be moved into attendees section. Are the folks that are on right now, would you like me to do that for you guys? I can't see you, unfortunately, because this shared screen. So if you
That's can... just you. This is Sabrina. You can do it for me as well.
Thank you very much.
Same for Jessica Chase.
Yeah, me too. All right. David.
And for Wendy as well. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
This is Elzora. Me too.
Thank you.
Move Judith. Move Judith.
And sorry, Jesse, I'm going to wind up joining on my phone again in a few minutes, so you can just automatically move me over.
Sounds good.
Sorry, bye.
Sadye is also Special Assistant to the Chancellor to discuss our first topic, the changes to the school admission policy. Afterwards, committee members Josephine Ishman and Katie Stokes will begin our second topic regarding school racial disparity. Thank you, and I'm sure you will find this forum very informative. I turn this over now to Sadye. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan, and shout out to Elzora, former panel for educational policy member, public school parent, and just a queen of Chelsea. So it was nice to see you, however briefly, Elzora. And good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Sadye Campoamor. I'm going to make sure that our team gets to introduce ourselves, and then we'll talk just quickly because it's important you know who we are. We'll also put our contact information make sure Jesse has it so that in the event you want to talk more or you have other ideas, you will be able to do that, and we'll make sure that that is available to you. My name is Sadye Campoamor. I'm a public school graduate of New York City schools. I'm also a public school parent. So this work is just as much professional as it is personal to me. I'm the Director of Community Affairs at the Department of Education. I was a former special assistant to the Chancellor, but shout out to all of the chancellors, Fariña and Garanza, and our incoming Chancellor, Misha Ross Porter. All amazing people, and so excited to continue my work for them to advance equity and excellence. Spoiler alert, you can't have one without the other. And I'm joined tonight with other colleagues. Nyah, will you introduce yourself? And then we'd love to have our superintendent, who is newer to the district, but not new to the district, and he'll share more about that as well. Nyah, go ahead.
Thank you, Sadie. Hi, everyone. My name is Nyah Chadha. I am also a public school alum. And have been at the DOE and the Office of Student Enrollment for a little while now. I work primarily on issues of integration and desegregation in our system, so that's why I'm super excited to be here today. I see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of very knowledgeable people on this topic, so I'm excited to hear the conversation in the panel.
Thank you. And Kelly.
Thanks, Sadie. My name is Kelly McGuire. I'm the superintendent of District 2. I'm working into that title. I've been superintendent for about the past month now. Prior to that, I was deputy superintendent in District 15 for a year. But before that, I was a principal in District 2 for 14 years. And so I know the district well, and it's great to be back. I'm also the parent of 2 public school kids who attend middle school in Brooklyn. Very happy to be back in person. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. And we're again going to take questions, and we'll make sure that you have all of our contact information. But we're here to talk about the admissions changes that are taking place for the upcoming school year. And so that is school year 21-22. Starting in September. We're not here to talk about this year's admissions or the future, because right now the admissions changes that we're going to talk about are announced for 1 year. There is going to be expansive conversations again about what they should look like going forward. We hope that conversations like this can inform them. We also know that there were changes to gifted and talented this year. But again, just to focus us today on this beautiful evening, we're here to talk about the middle school admissions changes and the high school admissions changes that were made for our upcoming school year, incoming students in September. So I don't need to tell anybody on this call that coronavirus came into our city and lifted up disproportionalities that were there in health care system and in every single system. And it gave us, the Department of Education, a real opportunity to face those inequities in the face. We know that students of color are learning from remotely 4 times as likely as their white counterparts. And so learning loss is on the top of every single parent's mind. We also didn't have the test scores, and we had to radically adapt to school as we know it on March 16th, just basically a year ago from today. And so we asked ourselves, what is going to be the most fair and most equitable admissions plan given the pandemic and in some cases pandemics, right? And we wanted to also make it simple for families, because we know that all of us, and you heard a lot of family parents on the call already, we've gone through a lot. And so how do we balance wanting to use this moment to make change in service of advancing equity, removing barriers, but also recognizing that even more change and new information and new ways of doing admissions in schools is really difficult during a moment of such uncertainty. And so I'm going to actually hand it to Nyah to walk us through the simple changes, but again, to keep in mind that they are announced for 1 year, and we are open to a conversation that continues to center equity, that you can't have equity without excellence. And of course, sometimes that means removing barriers and increasing access to our schools to do so. So with that, Nyah.
Thank you, Sadie. So I'm going to go through these changes pretty briefly, but of course, if there's questions, we're around to dig into the details a little bit more. You can go to the next slide. Okay, great. So we're going to start with middle school admissions. This is kind of the most straightforward change and a pretty significant one. What we found this year when thinking about how to adjust admissions in response to the pandemic, we just found that there was no information really available to continue to do admissions the way that we had in the past. So we put a pause on academic screens for 1 year. So for this current cycle, for this upcoming school year, all students admitted into middle schools will be admitted based on a lottery. And of course, their application choices. So your application goes into the mix and the decision is based on a lottery. One thing to note here is that district and zone priorities are still there. So if you're a District 2 family, you still have eligibility and priority to remain in district. We know that families want to be close to home, especially at such a, new and often scary time. And the application was due last month, but this is actually a little bit outdated now. But if you have any, last minute changes or anything that's necessary, you can always contact us or contact your counselor for more help. And your counselor is really, your number one go-to on all things admission. So please rely on all the wonderful school staff supporting you all during this time. Next slide, please. For high school admissions, the changes are a little bit more complex. So Sadie did talk about most of these being 1 year changes, but there is one part of the high school admissions change that's a longer term change. And that's the elimination of district and borough priorities and eligibilities over the course of 2 years. So part of the reason for this change is again centered around equity and access. We know that high school has historically been known as a citywide process, but a lot of the priorities and eligibilities that existed in admissions actually prohibited all students from taking advantage of all options, regardless of their zip code. So in reaction to, some of these disparities that Sadie mentioned earlier, we realized there's real opportunity to level the playing field a little bit more and to really make sure any student can go anywhere in the city that they're excited about. So in this first year, we removed district priorities, and that's very relevant, of course, for District 2, since it's one of the districts that had the most district priorities. And then moving forward, next year will be the last year, we're going to eliminate all borough eligibilities and priorities as well as zones. So really this is about access and about taking the opportunity to, make this a foundation of our admission system and ensure that families really can take advantage of all the wonderful options our city has to offer. And in terms of academic screens, unlike in middle school, for high school, there will still be academic screening this year. It will primarily be done using older student information. So some schools will be looking at 6th grade test scores, 6th grade academics, as well as mid-year 7th grade information. So it's a little different. The most exciting thing here is that a lot of it is more transparent. We've heard from so many advocates in the past, many of them on this panel, who have flagged that it's a really daunting and exhausting process sometimes applying to school in New York City, and you have to do it so many times. And so one of the improvements we tried to make this year was to make sure things are more standardized and available and transparent to families. I know that we always have work to do. There's always better improvements we could be making, but we're really excited to be able to have included more information about how a student is considered for admissions in my schools, which is where students apply to school. We also standardized, what components schools could look at versus not. So hopefully that may help some families navigate this process a little bit better. And then finally, we did auditions virtually this year, given the pandemic. We standardized components and audition expectations across the 25 schools. This was driven a lot by the audition principals, so we're really excited for that partnership. And hopefully that also created more opportunity for students to just apply to more schools than they had in the past, as opposed to going to 5 or 10 different audition schools to give 5 or 10 different auditions. And I think the last slide, Sadie, you'll take, right? Great.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's one more slide, which is this is a complicated conversation, and I wish I had more time to talk about how the mayor and Chancellor Carranza adopted a framework of integration that includes 5 R's that was made by students, resources, teacher representation, race and enrollment, which of course is what we're here to talk about. Enrollment is a lever for equity or removing barriers to get kids into schools. Restorative practices, which talks about discipline, and then of course real relationships, which is what we're doing tonight, building a real rapport so that we can have honest and courageous conversations and stay curious and experiment towards a system that's better for our young people. And with that, and that's why it was part of the mayor's announcement this December, is that we will be increasing the number of districts that will do district integration planning. It says diversity planning, yes, diversity, but also really that 5R full integration, because you can't really do one without the other. It really takes this holistic perspective and community input and buy-in and feedback and all the things. And over the next few years to expand to 32 districts. So at any time you ever want to invite me or Nadia or Stefan or Nyah back to talk about district integration planning, we would love to. This district that's in Community Board 4 is Community School District 2, and that was recipient of the N.Y.C Award. That's a New York State Integration Project grant to receive about $2.5 million over the next 3 years to really do community engagement and implementation to really take these issues on full steam. So happy to be in alignment with you, excited to build this relationship, and looking forward to partnering with Kelly and everyone on this call, and even your cousin and your distant cousin who wants to work on this stuff. Thanks for having us.
Great, thank you so much. So I am Katie Stokes. I am, by way of introduction, I'm also a parent of 2 kids who went through the public schools and are now in college. So I'm just going to address this first slide here and also just do some little introductions. As we've been discussing, the educational outcomes for Black and Latinx students in our district and in NYC generally lag behind white and Asian students. New York City public schools are the most segregated schools in the US. This includes both our neighborhood schools and our screen schools. They're both very segregated. And research shows that all students benefit when schools are integrated. Of course, integration alone won't guarantee that all New York City schools will be equally strong at meeting all of the needs of all of our students. Instead, desegregation is but one of many issues that the DOE needs to address in order to meet the needs of our students, including its Black and Brown students who are lagging behind. Some of the other issues that need to be addressed, of course, include class sizes, early interventions, culturally appropriate curricula, strong after-school programs, on-site social workers, challenging curricula, all of that stuff. So clearly the DOE has so many issues to address. Over the past decade, momentum has been building citywide for desegregating our public schools, starting, as you can see on this slide, with PS 133 in 2012, and supported by new legislation and grants from the state and from the DOE. Integration plans have been developed through community input and been approved by the DOE at the school, grade band, and district-wide levels. Each of the integration plans has been tailored to address local circumstances and is unique. As you can see on the slide, the first district-wide integration plan was approved by the DOE in 2017 for our neighbor, District 1. And the following year, in 2018, the DOE approved District 15's middle school integration plan and awarded grants to 5 districts to develop integration plans. District 2, which includes Community Board 4, as Sadye mentioned, has not yet made as much progress on building consensus for a district integration plan as these other districts leading the work around the city. But we are delighted to have you all here this evening and to be beginning this discussion.
Thank you, Katie. Hi, I'm Josephine Ishman. I'm also a Community Board 4 member and a public school parent. We went through the middle school process, so I can understand everyone's concerns about lack of diversity and how challenging the process is for getting into middle schools. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the diversity efforts that have been going on in District 2. CB4 is part of Schools District 2 that covers most of Lower Manhattan, Midtown, and the Upper East Side. District 2 overall is a very high performing district. In 2019, the last year we had state test results for, 78 and 80% of District 2 fourth grade students received 3 or 4 on their math and ELA exams. However, in CB4, Black and Latino students are disproportionately underrepresented in G&T programs and screened middle schools that serve as pipelines to the selective high schools. In 2020, District 2 received a $2.7 million grant from the New York State Integration Program to learn about the benefits of integration and to develop a sustaining strategy that addresses it. Part of that work includes many set-asides at our schools for free and reduced price lunch, students who qualify for this initiative. Some of those schools include the Gifted and Talented programs at PS 11 and Lower Lab, screened middle schools with 17% or more free and reduced price lunch set-asides at Clinton, Eastside Middle, Lab, Salk, and Yorkville East, and our selective high schools with 50% or more free and reduced price lunch set-asides include Baruch, Beacon, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Lab. District 2 priority admissions for District 2 high schools was also eliminated as prior discussed. We also have a pilot program here that took place at 2 of our schools, elementary schools located in CB4. And this was the Culturally Responsive Sustaining Curriculum program. And basically what this program does is that it designs and implements curriculum representative of children's diverse experiences. So while we've done some work here in District 2, we still have quite a ways to go. And the CEC and DOE staff, they've made some very well-intentioned attempts for more equitable admission system and less segregated schools, but we're still pretty much where we were 4 years ago when I started this work. So as Katie was saying, that our neighbors in districts 1 and 3 have had implemented integration plans with lots of community input and that the DOE approved. So we're looking forward to working more with our families on this issue. Thank you.
So hello, everyone. I guess this is the juicy part, maybe. I'm Leslie Bogosian Murphy. I want to thank all the panelists for being here tonight. We'll get to our panel discussion right now. And so we want a really robust discussion about this. And just to make it easier on Zoom, I'll address initial questions to a panelist, but please, if any one of you feel free, just jump right in. Let me introduce the panel first. So join us today, as you already met actually, is the newly appointed Superintendent of DOE District 2, Kelly McGuire. Kelly, hello. Next is Community Board 4 member, Mercedes Vargas. Mercedes is actually a District 2 DOE parent of 2 children, one in high school, and then the youngest will be going through this process. Hello, Mercedes. We also have Nyah Berg, who is the Integrated Schools Project Director at New York Appleseed. And for those of you who don't know, New York Appleseed has been helping schools and districts in New York City develop strategies for desegregating schools for the past decade. Thank you for being here. And also from the DOE, who we already met, is Sadye Campoamor, the New York City DOE Director of Community Affairs and Special Assistant to the Chancellor. And lastly, we are joined by Stefan Lallinger. Stefan is the director at the Century Foundation's Bridges Collaborative. And the Century Foundation is a progressive think tank that has researched on both the impact of both segregation and integration in schools nationwide. And Stefan, you're also a former teacher and principal. Am I right? Or am I wrong?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
Proud former teacher.
We're in good hands, people. We're in good hands with this whole group. But Stefan, we'll start with you. And this is really a broad question. What are you finding is the correlation between admission screens, and as you know, there are different levels of that, and a school's population?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. This is really a pleasure to be a part of this conversation, and I applaud the whole community for having this conversation. It's a really important conversation to be having. The composition of our schools, what our schools look like, how they're serving our students, how well or not well they're serving our students. It's just a really important conversation to have. And in my capacity as the director of the Bridges Collaborative, I get to have these kinds of conversations with folks all over the country. So my hope today is to bring a little bit more of the sort of national and historical perspective to this issue. And for all the local stuff, you're in good hands with some of the other folks on the call. To your question, there's no question that that selectivity tends to correlate highly with segregation along lines of race and along lines of class. And exactly how that happens and what the mechanics of that are really depend on what the criteria are that are used in order for a school or a district to decide what is it, what are we looking at that determines whether or not a student has access to a particular school or not. So it's hard to give a really blanket statement to say, screens have this exact impact, because screens in different places have different impacts, and different is figuring out what types of screens specifically have the most disproportionate impact for a given school in a given community. And the answer is different in different places. And I think the other piece is for communities to really define and decide for themselves, what is the purpose of screens? Why do we have the screens for a particular school? Because there are legitimate reasons to have certain kinds of screens, but there are also screens that are used in nefarious ways. And sometimes people don't even realize the origins of certain screens that have been used simply to divide certain populations and create enclaves of certain students who come from certain backgrounds and enclaves of students who come from other backgrounds in different schools. So I would say the purpose of a particular screen is really, really important. And then things change all the time. Populations change, dynamics change. It's important to not just say, this is the screen that we have and we're going to just keep it in perpetuity. It's important to consistently examine what are the effects that our screens are having. Do they meet the intended design? And then what is the effect on the diversity of the population, which, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I just want to work off that and I'll go to either you, Stefan, or Nyah. I think parents hear screens or the elimination of screens, and all of a sudden, for some reason, I don't know if this is true or not, maybe their minds go to, well, then the academic standards are lower, or my kid's not going to get that high education. Is that true? Is there a correlation? What do you think, Nyah?
Yeah, and perfect setup from Stefan. And I also will do my quick splurge of thank you for inviting us into this space. I think all of us on this panel love to talk about this, and we love when we're invited to talk about it. To connect back, I want to set some context for New York City, thinking about New York City specifically. And I think that there's a myth that persists about segregation in New York City solely being due to residential segregation. Where we have this coupling in New York City of which we have residential segregation in that historical context. We have continuing housing discrimination, and then we also have this coupled unfettered school choice. So when we think about specifically talking about screens at the middle school level, New York Appleseed actually released a report in 2019 that showed that residential segregation was not the driving force behind the middle school segregation, but rather only 17% of the city's middle schools solely focused on student place of residence for admission. So we're seeing
what was the driving force?
The driving force was the unfettered school choice that was then compounded on by the use of screens. So with all of that being said, I cannot make a strong case on the benefits of screens for New York City children, especially when we're judging the educational attainment of students as young as 9 years old. I think that is fundamentally inappropriate to think of judging at such a young age. However, I can confidently say that eliminating screens creates a pathway for integration and integration strategies that has reams of social science research on the benefits of integrated schools and classrooms for all students.
Yeah, you know what, Sadie, you guys had a really comprehensive, a really great presentation. I think though some parents might want to know a little more. So when you announced that you were removing this testing component that was so, I guess, relied heavily on for so many years, right? Placing students into junior highs, can you just give parents some insight on why that was done? Was it partly COVID? Was it philosophically motivated? Was it a little bit of both? Or was it, hey, COVID gave us this opportunity to do so? And then my second part of that is, can you explain the lottery system just a little bit more for parents to understand?
Sure, absolutely. So that's a great question. So first, screens. There are a lot of different types of admissions screens. There's tests, state tests. There are some schools that have created their own tests. There are auditions. There are behavioral grades, lateness and absences, attendance, as well as grades like on your progress report. Those are multiple different types of screens. And so some of those were explicit, like we didn't have state tests. We didn't have we weren't tracking attendance in the same way. We weren't giving behavioral grades. Our progress reports looked different in some cases. And auditions, we weren't in person. So almost every single type of academic screen was impacted by COVID. However, we could have taken a test, like I guess schools could have made up another test. You know, there could have been ways. So most of them were directly impacted by COVID. That is, the world as we knew it had to necessarily change because we weren't going to even have the data sets that we would once need. And so that's real, that's a fact. And so no matter what, we needed to make some changes. We needed to think about what admissions for this year was going to look like. That being said, and I appreciate the question, there were conversations led by organizations like Appleseed, where Nyah works, for many years that questioned, was it fair to grade 9-year-olds, that 9-year-olds who are late to school, or it's often because, like, you know, mom or dad, caregiver, grandpa is running late. It's not because a 9-year-old doesn't want to get to school. Auditions raised questions around, well, if I have the access to give my kid, you know, all of these lessons, like, does that really mean that they wouldn't have, and you shouldn't have an opportunity to play this instrument, right? A lot of theoretical questions. Chancellor Carranza, when he came in 2018, began his tenure with a student listening tour and basically heard resounding from hundreds of people from across the city, our schools are segregated, our schools are segregated, what are you going to do about it? Why does this person have a gym? Why does that person have sports? Why does this person have art? Why is access to here look so different? You know, I mean, those questions were pervasive. And so the way the public heard that was like, whoa, that's pretty strong. But he wasn't making it up. He had just heard in a very short, concentrated period of time from hundreds, if not thousands of people across the city, that we had to look at our system with a critical lens, with a critically conscious lens. And so he did say publicly, I think on more than one occasion, that he wasn't sure of the value of middle school screens. That is, it was such a young age to gauge where students were at. High school discussion was always more nuanced because when you listen to educators, they have more nuanced reactions to it. And I don't want to take up too much time because I know there was a second part of the question about the lottery that I want Nadia to answer, but I would just say it's one of those difficult, Leslie, I'm so sorry. It's like a yes and. It's like, yes, we had to change it because of COVID. And these are worthy conversations that were and are very difficult to come to policy agreements around.
Thank you.
Nadia, you want to take the second
part?
Nadia,
you know what, people, I guess parents are, just explain the lottery system a little more, how numbers are assigned, are there appeals? I think those are a lot of questions going on in parents' minds.
Yeah, sure. I'm also at the end going to drop a few resources into the chat because we have a lot of videos that actually talk about this in more detail online. But the number one biggest factor that goes into where you get an offer is your application choices. So that has not changed. You should look for 12, up to 12 application choices that are interesting to you, explore your options, try to put down, what we call a balanced application, which means don't list every high demand screen school only, but look at some that are maybe average or lower demand that you could see your child succeeding at. So that's the biggest thing. But then basically what happens in the match is after applications close and we're about to, start the actual algorithm, every student will have a random number that's kind of like a combination of letters and numbers, and you could literally sort it and it would sort A to Z and you would find your place in a line of students. What happens for any one program is that all the applicants for that program kind of get sorted in this line for this program. And if there's more seats than there are applicants available, great, everyone gets an offer. If there's competition for the seats, so there's more applicants than there are seats, we take the first, as many kids as there are seats in that random number order. So if you have a strong random number compared to other students that are applying, you'll be towards the front of that line versus the alternative. But the thing to keep in mind is that there's so many kids in the city applying to so many different programs that, if you knew your number today, you wouldn't necessarily know what that means for your chances at getting an offer. Because a lot of kids that are technically, in this line with you, they might match to something higher up on their application and they get taken out. So you might think, oh, compared to every other kid, I'm like number 75 on this list. But when you remove all the students that match to something that they prefer more, you move up in that line, just like you would any other line. So it's actually it gets a little weedsy, which is why I never know how much is enough. But I'm going to drop a few links in the chat that go into this in a little bit more detail. We have a whole page on our website that's just about random numbers. So you can find a lot more information there.
Great. Thank you so much. And I just want to remind everyone who's watching, the attendees, that you can put your questions in the Q&A, and we're having someone monitor that, and then we can then ask your questions as well. But I want to go to Mercedes, because Mercedes, you're a parent, you're hearing all this. So what are your foremost concerns with all of these changes?
Well, I think understanding that it's only for a year is important for parents, and kind of like what changes will happen next year. Like one of the things that I know parents, and as a parent, I needed to go on tours, right? And see the school culture and the environment. And that was something that was not accessible to people this year. So I know that's one concern. Parents want to be able to go back on tours, even though that process is crazy, but it's still something that parents want to do. And then everyone's concerned about learning loss, how much people have lost this year. And also the question of free and reduced lunch. Like I don't know anyone that fills out that form. Like they just check the box that you don't qualify, but we have people that lost their jobs and, and it's listed as one of the things. So if I could have an understanding of what that means and how that affects the lottery, I think that would be something that parents would be concerned about. Yeah, so I think that's it for now.
Sadie, do you have an answer about the lunches, at least for now, or no?
I can jump in. Yeah, I think what you're referring to is some schools that have a priority for underrepresented students. We call that diversity in admissions. And there's actually quite a few schools in District 2 that employ this initiative. And the goal of that is to have a more representative class of students in the school. So the reason that the lunch form comes into play is that most of these schools give priority to students who are lower income. So yes, we use the meal form for that, and we are going to be conducting over the next week or two some direct outreach to families that apply to those programs, just to make sure that they know where they have to go to fill out the form and understand, what exactly is required to qualify for that prioritized group of seats. That doesn't mean that only low-income students get into those schools. It's always just for a portion of seats, and then there's the rest of the seats are open to anyone who applies. So we'll definitely have more information about that soon for directly to families.
Kelly, we've talked before, and boy, you're really coming in at a great time, aren't you? There's really nothing going on in to become the new
It's a perfect time.
Great. I want to ask you, so like I keep saying, I think parents are concerned about the level of education. So how, as a superintendent, how will classrooms meet the different educational needs of level 1 through 4 students and keep them challenged?
Yeah. And again, thank you very much for having me too, and being able to speak on this topic. Yeah, I mean, the truth of the matter is that in all of our classrooms across the city, there has been a wide range of different performance levels, strengths, and needs in classrooms, no matter where you go. And that goes for the most elite private school to every public school. And this is one of the things that we've been working on with teachers for a long time. As a school leader, it was priority number one for me to ensure that my teachers were as well prepared as possible to be able to serve students who were performing differently. I think that what people sometimes have in their mind is that that means that students are grouped by level and then served differently in different corners of the room, or assigned tasks that are completely different. And that may be part of the equation for a portion of the lesson, but really what we want to try to do is help to support our teachers so that they can think about who the students are in their classroom, create opportunities for kids to share ideas and to exchange experiences, and then really use that to build upon the tasks that they were already going to do and the work that they were going to complete. And so the pandemic and the past year of learning remotely has actually created some additional tools for our teachers that we're beginning to work with school leaders now on to think about how it is that those are going to be integrated into the classrooms that in the configuration that we're all familiar with, one teacher plus 25 to 30 students or so.
Actually, yeah, I was going to ask you, are schools preparing for diverse populations next year? Are there adjustments to the curriculum? Are there extra supports for teachers? Is there anti-bias training or any of those things preparing for September?
There are certainly a lot of different needs that we're trying to work as quickly as possible. Somebody told me that, in the first month of being superintendent that I should, take it easy and, make sure that I'm getting a full understanding of the landscape of the district. But I don't think that opportunity really exists right now, and probably truthfully doesn't exist for any superintendent under any circumstance. But in the first month, we've jumped right in. We have two different groups of principals, teachers, and other school leaders who are getting together regularly. One that is focused entirely on implementing equity and anti-racism training for our teachers, so that when kids come into the classroom, they understand that every single individual who comes in is bringing something special and has a story to tell and has an identity that needs to be honored and valued, and that needs to be worked into our curriculum. The other group that we're working with is more focused on the specifics around some of these new technologies and configurations that we're going to be able to implement in our classrooms. Thinking about, teachers are now, teachers who maybe had never created a screencast video before are now able to do so in a matter of minutes. And so thinking about how it is that you can group students together, give them a short video to watch so that they can get started on individual tasks. And then that kind of thing really frees up teachers to be able to work with students more easily in small groups or individually. And so we're off and running. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but we are off and running, and it's kind of amazing that you bring together a group of teachers from this school or that school, or a group of principals from this neighborhood or that neighborhood, and everybody's kind of thinking about the same thing, and that's really great.
So this could either be Stefan, either one of you can jump in on this one. I think screen schools, G&T programs, they've been popular for years for New York City families, whether it represented some sort of upward mobility or it represented like a secure, a solid education. So is there any research being done to explore how academic screens can continue to be used, but also while eliminating racial disparities? Or is that just, are they just too oil and water?
I think what first comes to mind that Stefan might be able to talk a little bit more on is Chicago, in some pieces there. But I think specifically talking about middle school, I think what we've found it is almost impossible to break apart the structures and honestly the structural racism that is embedded and has become really a hierarchy within screens at the middle school level and those inequities from instituting them. So, our hope specifically in New York Appleseed is that the elimination of middle school screens will be a permanent change and a beginning towards, again, these more integrated classrooms that we know benefit all students. Interestingly enough, when you were talking about the thing for, accelerated learners and groupings, I think about a lot of the teachers that have creative strategies available for flexible grouping and the benefits that can come from that. I think of the example of Rockville Center that detracked their high school math curriculum and had heterogeneous accelerated learning, and you saw all passing rates for all students increase. So I think about there are a lot more stronger cases for the benefits of eliminating these barriers and having students in integrated environments. And I think the last thing I'll say before passing it to Stefan is one thing that we haven't talked about as much is the student experience with these screens. And I think that I hear from students almost every other day when I was discussing these from students at Integrate NYC that the screens were linked to stress, to a serious mental toll, and this idea of unworthiness and that piece of feeling inferior because you're excluded from public school, and especially what that can take at 9 years old, and especially what that can do within a pandemic, I think is something to seriously take into consideration when thinking about benefits versus drawbacks.
And Leslie, I'll just add, what I think is really important is for us to interrogate we talk about quality, and I've heard you in a number of questions already sort of bring up this concern around, is quality compatible with diversity? And I think, we're at a moment in public education where we need to dig a little bit deeper and talk about what does quality at a school actually mean and what does it look like, which is why it was music to my ears to hear Mercedes, who's a parent, say one of her top priorities was actually physically walk into a school, take a tour and see, how does it feel? What are students doing? So forth and so on. I think that's one of the most underappreciated ways to actually get to know a school and what a school is doing for a child. On the quality issue, rightly so, parents are highly concerned about the level of academic rigor that their child is going to get when they step into a school building. But I think what often happens is we look at a school's test scores. And, I think the 0 to 4 scale is a little bit, let's imagine there was a 0 to 100 score on test scores, and you had a school that had an average of 95 for all of its students when they came into the school, which is effectively what screens do, right? They say, we want to take a certain cut of students. And then in 8th grade, when those students then graduate, the average test score is 95. And so we look at that school and we say, well, that's a really highly successful school. But the question really needs to be, what was the value added to those students in the school? You came in with the same score that you left with. And so we're conflating folks coming in, screens essentially saying we're going to take a selective group of students, and then when they leave, we're going to be really happy that they've got these really high test scores, but nothing has actually happened in the interim. And I'm not saying that's what's happened at all of the screen schools, but that's an important thing to not conflate with quality.
So here then for you, Stefan, this is a charged question. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Study after study has shown that integrated schools are beneficial to students across the board, right?
That's right.
Not only that, but that includes mixed learning levels.
That's right.
Even the lower grades, it shows that all learning levels benefit when it's a mixed classroom, right?
That's right.
So what do you think the pushback is attributed to? Why do parents push back?
Well, I think again,
sorry to put that question on you.
No,
or anyone else who wants to take that.
This is Leslie. This is why I showed up. So I'm not, this is a great question. These are the things I love to talk about. Again, I think there is, number one, a huge perception issue around what we think of as quality. This is why I talked about the whole quality thing is you have folks who, have never stepped foot in a school building and assume because of X, Y, and Z that this is the gold standard. And there's little interrogation about what actually makes a quality school. We know from research that a student's teacher is the highest predictor of whether or not a student will be successful academically in a given year, followed second by a student's principal, and the environment and the culture that a principal then creates for the rest of the school. And so it's not whether or not I'm sitting next to all kids who also perform at the highest percentile level. So I think a lot of it is based on perception. The perception question goes a little bit deeper, Leslie. There are also, biases and stereotypes that we harbor. And so because of the way that we have the policies that we have that have essentially created systems where we concentrate students in concentrated poverty in one school, and we have students who come from wealth concentrated in other schools, then you also start to see other things happen, such as resources get diverted to wealthy schools, facilities get get upgraded at wealthy schools, teachers select in and opt in, experienced teachers want to teach at wealthy schools. And so then it becomes a vicious cycle where then you start to see the byproducts and the consequences of the systemic and policy issues that we've essentially created that lead to these things. So it's perception and it's this vicious cycle, but happy to have other people chime in as well.
Sadie, what is your, I'm curious on the DOE thoughts on that.
I think that the DOE and people across the board have a long way to go to really connect that integration there's not only a moral imperative and a legal imperative, but it also is a proven academic intervention. And I think that we are in that growth space in the Department of Education and in partnership with you and our educators and our students that are wondering, the ABCs of integration, some said, are achievement. You have to have achievement, and it's a necessary part of it. It's baked into it, right? That when we're in an exchange of different types of learners, that's why we don't do as much resource room or special education in these tiny classrooms segregated anymore, that we see inclusive ICT classrooms as the model, as the gold standard for our special education, including ASD Nest, which Superintendent McGuire can talk about as well ad nauseum. We also see this model with our multilingual learners. But beyond that, so achievement's necessary, right? Giving a sense of belonging is necessary. I'm from El Salvador. Today is the Day of the International Woman. So shout out to all of us, and always shout out to the caregivers in general. But I never heard about El Salvador growing up in my classroom. I never saw anybody that looked like me, no teacher, no real other students that looked like me in my classroom. That was devastating. It caused a sense of worthlessness and shame about who I was. I had to be invisible and make myself small and assimilate to something that I wasn't, instead of deliberately be celebrated for who I was or the differences that all of our young people and our learners bring to the classroom. So achievement, belonging, and then a commitment. And it will take an ongoing commitment to have conversations. We're not going to end racism by June. We're not going to end racism in 2 years from now. I can't give you the 8-point plan, but what I can do and offer is an opportunity, an invitation for us to commit to having these conversations and again, center achievement, belonging, commitment, and let's go. But none of us have experienced that world yet. So I have to just humbly, and in the DOE too, so I humbly partner with them internally as much as I partner with you externally to experiment towards that more perfect public school system for our young people. Enrollment is one lever to do that. It's not the full story. And our kids deserve more than that too, right? It's not just we're gonna mix kids up and hope for the best. It's not we're gonna one-hit wonder this and that. It's gonna take a long time, but I'm here for it.
Can I ask Superintendent McGuire one question? I'm going to switch it from parents and kids to teachers and educators. What are their concerns about this? Because they're getting switched up on too, and I think we have to think about that population? What are you hearing so far?
I mean, just to take it back a little bit, I started in New York City in 2004. I moved, was a teacher in Oakland, California, and then moved here. And I will say that stretching back to 2004, I recall conversations that with other school leaders, with other assistant principals and principals and teacher leaders in our district, and they were upset about some of the practices around screening that were happening in our district. And so I'll bring that forward now to say that a lot of our teacher leaders, assistant principals and principals are actually very excited about the opportunity to have this year to show what it is that can be done in an integrated classroom. And so this Friday, I'm having my first teacher leader meeting with, I put a call out there to all teachers in District 2, asking them if they want to, would be interested in joining an equity focused conversation with me, specifically for the purpose of sharing practices about teaching diverse classrooms. And within a week, I was overwhelmed by, over 50 teachers had reached out to me wanting to be a part of this group. So I have to rethink my strategy a little bit because there are so many people who are interested in doing it. But I think that they're really, really excited. This was certainly like a very, very challenging year for teachers. But the teachers that I have been speaking with are really leading practices in their schools. And they think that there's a lot that they have learned, and there's a lot that they've learned that they can turnkey with other teachers in their schools. So this is been a year in which so many people have stepped up to do amazing work, and I think that our teachers are they're ready to do it. And it's up to our school leaders and district leaders to support them in it.
I have a few quick, Kit, am I going over, Kit, or no? Am I okay? Because I have a few quick questions and that's it. For Nyah, actually, I'll give them to you. These are parent quick questions. Will zone middle schools have AP and SP programs? Will they still?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is actually more a question for Kelly because these are, programmatic and pedagogical choices that we fully support our school leaders in making the decisions around. In terms of admissions, they don't exist as an admissions program, but of course schools could offer advanced programming as they see fit.
The District 2 schools have decided not to. So this coming year, there will be no academic and social progress classes. They will just be middle school classes.
And what is the reasoning behind that?
Well, frankly, the schools that have had both AP and SP classes are some of the teacher leaders or principal leaders and school leaders that have expressed a lot of concerns about having multiple tracks in their school, but they don't see they have not yet. They don't see that there's a way for them to separate students out, and they are not implementing any kind of school-based test. We've taken attendance off the table, grades off the table, state exams off the table, and so in their mind, they don't see any reason for why it is that they should create two different tracks of kids in the school.
But how would that affect the feed into the high schools though, into the selective high schools? Would there? No.
I mean, I can send it to Nyah just in regard to how screens are being handled at the high school level.
Yeah, so it wouldn't matter if they were learning in an AP or SP class for high school admissions. At that level, we're just looking at grades and test scores overall. So it doesn't matter exactly if you're in a particular program or not, just how you're performing overall.
Mercedes, I have one question for you. What are your concerns with the lottery system, if any, specifically?
Just a better understanding of it. And I'm going to probably look at the videos that were sent, but just a better understanding. And I think this will help clear up a lot of questions that people might have about the lottery. But I know there were groups that wanting to know the number, and I think it doesn't matter. And I really think the emphasis should be like parents picking like the top 5 schools they want, and really like a school that's right for their child. I think that's really what's important.
Stefan, what would you like to see? What if you had your choice of like, okay, this is how we're going to integrate schools, what would you want to see in New York City? Is this the biggest question? Can I give you 30 minutes for that? I guess maybe.
I was going to say how long. How long do we have here?
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's a really good question. I mean, obviously there are the elementary, middle, and high school levels need to be taken differently. We've got a citywide system for high school, and so the first step has already been taken, which is if we say we've got a citywide system for high school, and it's not related to where you live, then we shouldn't. There are a number of schools in District 2 where if you were a kid who lived anywhere outside of District 2, you had no shot of getting in. And where's the fairness in that if we've got a citywide operation here for high school? So high school, I think the city is on the right track. But middle school and elementary school is where things have become a little bit more difficult to say this is a universal solution, because if we look at every single community school district, the demographics vary significantly. And so this is where it comes to the question of, well, how are we defining diversity and integration? What is our definition of integration? Is it that a given school is going to be reflective of the city's student population? Simply not possible in certain community school districts. Is it going to be that schools are reflective of the specific community school district? If that's the case, then there are a couple of models that folks can look to. So one is a model called controlled choice, which is used in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where essentially you have a system where a bunch of elementary and middle schools are in a pretty proximate geographic area. Families and parents can visit all of the schools. They can rank where they want their students to attend school. And there's an algorithm that takes into account both parents' choices and the demographics of the school. And what you have in Cambridge is you essentially have a guarantee that no matter what elementary or middle school you go to in Cambridge, it's going to be diverse along lines of class and along lines of race. And so because you have that guarantee, it sort of takes the fear out of it. Because I think to also get to part of your earlier question, why are parents always choosing this option if we know all the data is there on diverse schools? In most parts of the United States, you don't actually have the choice to either go to a diverse school or a diverse high quality school or a homogeneous high quality school. We have set things up so that you are either making the choice to attend a school that is almost entirely made up of affluent students, or entirely made up of low-income students. And again, not anything inherent to students who come from low-income backgrounds, but it's the vicious cycle that I talked about before, which is the schools tend to be under-resourced. They tend to have teachers who aren't as experienced. And so the choice there's not this diverse school for me to just simply choose to go to, which is why you need a system-wide solution to ensure that all schools in a system are high quality, they're rigorous, they're diverse, which is what Cambridge has done. And which I think is what District 15 is inching towards. They've got a slightly different system where you've got a system of priority and you still get to choose as well. It's not controlled choice like Cambridge. So there are a number of different options, particularly for schools that are in geographically proximate areas. But it's going to vary by community school district. It's going to vary by your goals and your aims. What do you want out of a system? And so there are a lot of questions at play. There's no one answer we could say we may wave this magic wand and we've integrated New York City public schools.
So Stefan or Nyah, actually, this is the investigative reporter is going to come out in me now, and I am going to ask you. There is a population, a community, the Asian community, that says, you know what, we're not wealthy. You know what, we're poor too. You know what, we're a minority too. And we feel that this is discriminating against us, this new system is hurting us. What would you say to that community who they feel that this is maybe, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but what I have seen and what they have said is that they think this is their chance to, this is their upward mobility chance. This is their chance to integrate themselves into the fabric of America and New York City in particular. What would you say to them? I don't know who wants to take that. I'll just throw it out there.
Yeah, and I think I saw Sadie raise her hand too, and I think we talk a lot in the context of thinking about segregation and particularly screens as being exclusionary. And you'll hear us talk about Black and Latinx folks, but I think we also have to recognize that screens also are exclusionary towards English language learners, students that are part of low income population. And those populations are large within the Asian American and Asian community within New York City. So those, when they say not what, yes, acknowledging and also acknowledging that screens are also excluding that population. And I think it's all about, again, ensuring these community conversations. I think we see across spans of people of color, folks that feel that they have been silenced, not heard, historically marginalized, and Asian Americans are as much part of that group when we are talking about BIPOC communities, and they need to be part of those community conversations and that community engagement. And they are not easy conversations. And I think that there is a certain amount of listening that needs to be had and a certain amount of calling more folks into that conversation. And I actually do want to give a shout out to the Coalition of Asian American Children and Families, CACF, that does some really great work with centering those conversations. And I've been hoping to continue to have partnerships with them and make sure that, we are listening to those communities and also acknowledging that that they are part of, they are part of the integration conversation and making sure that they are not excluded from that.
And Sadie, do you have anything to add to that? Because I just know there's sometimes a friction. Like we see it at the community meetings, we see it at. If you want to address that, that would be great.
Yeah, I do. I mean, first what Nyah said is right on, and that's in essence what I was going to say. That first, the word that the designation Asian represents nearly 49 different nations. And you're talking about, in some cases, hundreds of dialects. So this is a very diverse community. And I know that because of 45's language around, I don't even want to repeat it, but the type of way that coronavirus was referred to under our previous president didn't help anything. And so the fissure, it needs to be repaired. There's harm done. There's also the Department of Education, needs to do more, not just to provide language access, but really move towards, again, experiment towards language justice. That is, where language isn't a barrier for participation. And that's something that we need to do better on. But to Nyah's point, and this is just to say it again, is that I've heard that nearly 1 in 3 students that identify as Asian drop out of school, of high school. And so the academic crisis that we're all talking about, the hope for the best, that's something that we're all swimming in. And again, to Nyah's point, we, as in people of color in New York City, are the super majority. But I even further, I would say the super majority of people who identify as parents and caregivers, no matter your background, want the same thing for their kids, right? We want to walk into classrooms and feel like we're sending our kids to be treated like kings and queens where the expectations are high, right? I've done many tours of school where I've also heard the different, out of G&T kindergarten, they're reading and they're writing and they're doing arithmetic, and no, the other G&T, the other kindergarten class, not as much. Of course, people would buy into something where I'm like, you're selling me something that sounds better. So I think we as DOE have to repair harm that's been done, have to name that we need to build our relationship with Asian American communities and families, and we need to do better with language access so we can hear from everybody that wants to be heard from. But I also want to name that I think the supermajority of families and caregivers want the same thing. And I think the more we lean into moving in that space and moving from a place of solidarity with one another, I think we're going to see better for our kids. And that's what I'm trying to do.
I want to also ask that, personally, I think it's a little unfair when we talk about this, that we're always kind of talking about it or asking an angle of accelerated learners. What's going to happen to the accelerated learners? What's going to happen to the So I want to flip it a little bit. Like, there are kids who sometimes do need some extra help, and that in this conversation, we don't talk about them. And like, they're going to be integrated too. I mean, they're going to try and keep up now, maybe at a level. So I don't know if this is for Superintendent McGuire. I'm not sure. Whoever, what steps are going to be taken that these kids are not going to fall further behind, that they can have some tools to succeed when this happens next year?
I mean, absolutely. There's, but I think that this conversation and focusing energies on our students who are struggling, fits really perfectly within this broader conversation that we're having here around how is it that we can serve and support kids in the same classroom who might score differently on a test, might score high or might score low. I think the important thing for us to keep in mind, though, is that it is possible, and I have, 14 years as a principal, I saw it again and again and again, the importance of bringing kids together who had scored poorly on a state exam with kids who had scored extremely well on a state exam, and put them together to share and exchange ideas, and that there is so much that they can learn from each other. But there is also this real need to make sure that we are making progress. And so, when a lot of the conversations around accountability start being raised, there are some people who immediately turn their heads off of that. And I understand that when certain tools for accountability are used. However, an important piece of what it is that we do is that we keep track of how it is that our students are performing. And so selecting tools that we know are going to be respectful of the students that are being assessed, are assessing real information and real growth in learning are an important part of what we do. And we're not going to be able to call ourselves successful if all of our students aren't making progress. And I like how Stefan, couched what makes a good school. A good school is a school that helps all of our students to develop. And that, the checklist that we look at and that we use to evaluate progress goes much deeper than just how students are performing on exams.
Thank you. And I just have one last question. And just to get it on the record, Sadie, I guess this is for you. Is this temporary or permanent?
This is a 1 year. So that's what it is. I temporary would assume that I know it's going to be over, and that's what I'm not able to do. I also, I think we all know that this year was a full school year of remote hybrid learning for many of our learners, where we are just finding out from the Biden administration that we have to take tests, but actually our own governor and local officials have asked for waivers so that we didn't need to take tests. So we just found out that from the feds that we were going to have to administer them. So a lot of open questions around that. I know that students are pretty bummed out, and I appreciate you sort of bringing the conversation, centering our most marginalized students and families, because when you think about temporary, I think about them. I think about students in temporary housing. I think about our overage, undercredited students, our court-involved youth, our youth who have court-involved families, right? Like that, so it doesn't feel those circumstances of not having a device for months or all of the things don't go away or didn't go away this year. So the announcement was that is just for one school year. I don't know what the next one's going to be. And we have a lot of work to do on reimagining gifted and talented, as well as what we want to see as fair and equitable and excellent.
Oh, we'll have a forum on that too. Don't worry. We'll bring you all back for the G&T forum.
I'd love it. I'd love it. Also, you're killing it. You're a really good moderator. Okay. I've been on a lot of panels. You're awesome.
You. Wow. Thanks. I appreciate it. So my time is over now. With that, I might as well, it's like George Costanza. I got to leave on a high note. I can't but
I got a text and someone said, "Are you the Oprah of CB
of D2?"
I kind of feel like you are. Yeah. Just saying.
Thank you. But I do want to thank all our panelists. Actually, like I said before, we've been monitoring the chat. We want to give parents a chance to ask questions. I think I'm throwing it to Jesse, right? I'm throwing it to Jesse Bodine, who is our Community 4 District Manager. And he is going to introduce a poll for those watching to participate in, I believe. Right, Jesse? Thank you, guys.
Yes. So Kit, you'll let me know, or yeah, I guess Kit, you'll let me know when you feel comfortable, but I can start the poll now. Once it goes live, for all the folks who are attending, you should be able to answer the poll using the computer you're on, and hopefully your tablet if you're using a tablet. And you'll let me know. All right.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to speak for too long. I think the poll's pretty self-explanatory, but we were hoping to get some real-time data on what folks think about some of the really thorny questions that the panel was just discussing. And so Jesse will launch it. It should be easy for everyone to just click through it. And then we'll integrate that data into the last section of our event tonight, which is a Q&A, taking questions that we've already received, as well as some of the questions that have come up since the beginning of the forum. And then each panelist will have a chance to share their final thoughts, and we'll close out right at 8:30. You can go ahead and launch the poll, Jesse. Let's give people maybe 10 more seconds, Jesse, and then we can cut it off. I feel like the suspense is really building here.
All right. Okay, can you see the responses? Hold on, I'm sorry. I'm going to share the results. I apologize. I thought I just already pressed that. So I think everybody can see the responses at this point. Is that correct?
We'll give everyone another minute to sort of digest this data, and then we'll go into the last section of our forum tonight. All right, Jesse, do you mind closing out the poll results? Thank you, sir. So I am Kit Tollerson. Along with Alan, I co-chair the ACES Committee of Manhattan Community Board 4. I should share the disclaimer that I'm not as funny or as quick as Leslie, so this next series of questions is probably going to be a whole lot worse. Please bear with us because the panelists are still just as smart. We're going to be doing Q&A, and so if you have a question that you haven't had a chance to ask yet, please use the Q&A feature on Zoom. We also have a lot of questions that we received prior to the forum that I'm going to pull from as well. I'll try to direct these to a specific person, but panelists, none of y'all are shy and all of you have great things to say. So if there's a question that you want to take a swing at, please don't be shy. The first one that we are going to address is actually the last one we received from Emily Rowe. I'll just read it out loud for everybody. There is so much effort to integrate and diversify schools, which is great, but is there enough of an effort to uplift the education of all children of all backgrounds in all schools? Say a child does not get the school of his or her choice. What is the guarantee that this child will get the kind of education that is comparable to a top school or a private school? How do we make sure that as we focus more on providing help for children who need extra help, we don't leave behind the children that need the extra challenges? I think there are some angles of that have been covered, but I also think there's some pieces of it that are new, and I'm going to throw it to you, Superintendent McGuire, to take a swing at first.
Thanks, Emily, for the question. And you know, I agree with you. I mean, we need to continue to always think about how it is that we can do a better job of supporting our students and helping them to learn. I do think that the goal that we will, or the work that we're going to be doing in the coming year with integrated schools, or the anticipation that our schools are going to be more integrated, is really going to be an opportunity for us to put to practice a lot of the things that our teachers have been doing for a long time, which is around teaching and supporting diverse groups of kids in the classroom. I think that this is something that is entirely possible, especially with some of the new tools and learning that our teachers have done over the year. But it's going to be important for us to make sure that we're keeping track of how it is that our students are performing, and that is one of the priorities, and that is and that measuring their performance and their growth is going to be something that's absolutely necessary for our schools and our teachers to do. I mean, I do think that it's an exciting time for us to be looking at this, especially following such a difficult year. But I believe in the work of our schools. I really believe in the teachers of District 2, and believe that we're going to see the progress that we're looking to make this year.
Thank you for that. A question that we got a couple of different flavors of that I'll sort of do my best to synthesize is, what does teacher training need to look like? Prepare teachers for next school year. Maybe Sadie, you could take a swing at that, and Superintendent McGuire, if you also have thoughts, that would be helpful too.
Yeah, I mean, you know, from big picture, and this is really like from central, we are not as as connected as the superintendent is. And so I think big picture, we want to see healing centered spaces. We want to see teachers that were informed, trauma informed curriculum. That is, we have all experienced a lot, and we haven't had really any time to process or grieve because things just keep going. Thankfully, we're in a place of like vaccination and reopening, and we're moving towards the, the light at the end of the tunnel, but that's very recent for us. So we want our teachers to feel supported, because if they're not supported, they're not going to do right for our kids. And we do want to lift up the social emotional piece. The same way we're talking about integration almost, is that if I'm in a social emotional place as a student and a teacher and as a member of the school community, that's the foundation for being able to address the academic learning loss that we're talking about. So that's going to be something that you're going to hear out of Central over and over again. Again, I want to be clear about my language. Yes, trauma informed, but we don't want to just reduce people to their loss or their housing insecurity or whatever it may be. We also want to do with healing-centered spaces. That is where we all take responsibility for cultivating a learning environment that feels safe, where I, as a student, could feel brave to show up and to be seen in their fullness. And that's also anti-racist work. And so the implicit bias and the anti-racist trainings will have continued, but will continue through the year. And then if there are teaching and learning things that come out of Central, but I feel like the humanity of it rests with the superintendent. So I'm going to kick it over to you, unless you want me to give teaching and learning talking points, which you don't.
Well, maybe you are a parent, so all parents are teachers. So I'm sure that you would do a great job with that. I'm really happy to announce that today I received an email letting me know that the Phase 3 New York State Integration Grant funds will be loaded into our budgets very soon. And that's fantastic news and coming at a perfect time. As a part of the integration grant that is written for our district, we have a few different things going on. A big component of the work is built around teacher leaders. And over the time that I've been in New York, it's my home. I have to say that it's my home. I've been here now. You can call yourself a New Yorker. I think 17 years. I think I'm okay. But since coming here, it was moving to New York really just introduced me to a city that was committed to adult learning and to a school system that was committed to adult learning. And I was just very thankful to have the opportunity to engage in that when I moved to New York. So a big part of the integration grant is around funding teachers to serve as leaders and for other teachers in the district, around sharing best practices, around opening up their classrooms as lab sites, around researching some of the different curricula that we think are going to best support our students, both students from the lens of building culturally sustaining and engaging curricula, but also around accelerating learning. And so this is no easy task, absolutely not. But I think that we're in a good position, and this grant is really a gift at a time when we need it.
Really helpful to hear about. I'm going to go to Nyah with this next question. Two of my colleagues on the board noted that District 2 has not made as comprehensive progress or as quick progress as some of the other districts around the city in terms of integration and in terms of some of the equity initiatives that have been taken on. I'm curious to hear from you, sort of what is being learned around the city, especially in districts like District 1, where there has been more comprehensive and more rapid movement on these issues.
Yeah, thanks. And I think I can actually speak to, I want to highlight both District 15, Kelly and McGuire, Superintendent, where you come from. I'm sure you have a lot that you can add to the conversation, and District 13. Because District 13 actually right now, which Stefan can talk about as well, which have been really using the tool of community engagement to define what real integration means to them. So once you have, we're really discussing race and enrollment in that piece, but going to, again, a lot of the other 5 Rs, what does resource allocation look like? How are we fostering positive relationships between students once they're, in this school? How do we foster that, and how do we sort of implement culturally responsive and sustaining education? District 13 has been hosting town halls for their community through this process. And so I think that the more I've seen the support of community and having these courageous conversations, courageous policy has followed, right? And I think that that's one of the most important points is that you can have all the conversations in the world, but the policy has to follow. And I think that those, the District 15 integration plan, I think that District 13 instituted DIA for all of the middle schools that also are not going to have screens, I believe. So you're seeing a lot of these sort of conversations end up with these tangible changes. And I think that's something important to highlight. And I think it's good that, the community board, you guys are hosting this conversation tonight and being able to continue that. And then, tap on any one of us that can help with that development and implementation piece. I think I'm able to speak on these different things going on in the city is because I've luckily been invited into these spaces to help with the development that can be so complex. And I don't know if Stefan has anything to add because he's been working in some of those areas too, but yeah.
I actually have a bit of a different question for Stefan. And Nyah, I'll just say, be careful what you volunteer because community board, we love to drag people back in front of us. So all of you are probably going to get some emails. Stefan, one of the questions in the Q&A is, has this been tried in other cities? How did it go? You spoke a little bit about Cambridge. I'm curious though, are there other case studies, other models that could work in the unique context of New York City?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it depends again on what this is. Has integration been tried across the country? Absolutely. And again, necessarily it has had to take into account local, demographic issues, local sort of culture issues. And so I think the interesting thing about this conversation is that if you look at District 2 demographically, I mean, it's quite envious. I think there are a lot of districts around the country that would be like, you all have, a district that looks like America, right? You have a district that looks like New York City in terms of socioeconomic diversity, in terms of racial diversity. And you should see that as an asset and as a benefit and leverage that to create schools that uniformly look like the rest of the district. And if you do that, you're going to have a formula for success. I think the thing that folks are increasingly coming to the understanding of in our multicultural pluralistic society is that you can't really have a quality school in the United States in 2021 that is not diverse. I mean, there's so many things that you're not learning about the world if you attend school with folks who believe the same things that you do, look the same way that you do, come from the same kinds of households that you do. And so I think that is something that if you have this incredible benefit of the diversity right here in your district, and you have so many different tools that you could use, then I think you should go after them and you should do them. So yeah, Kit, this has been tried all across the country. I mean, there are, just to give a couple of concrete examples. So there are districts that have historically had a lot of middle and upper income folks flee the city district in the era of mandated desegregation. We can get into a whole talk about history about that. And so they're fighting a different battle where they're trying to say, how do we create a system that actually both brings people back into the fold who exited the system generations ago, but also serves the families and students who are here really, really well. And so places like Dallas, where they've actually started new schools. In Dallas, they have about 10 new school starts where they changed the admissions policy to make sure that these were what they call 50-50 schools. So 50% of the families that attend the schools come from middle and upper income backgrounds and 50% come from low income backgrounds. And these are some of the most sought after schools in the entire, in all of Dallas ISD. They've brought in families back into the system who had generations ago left it and gone to private school. So what I think that highlights is that if you do this right, and there's a right way to do this and there's a wrong way to do this, but if you do this right, what you end up with is a high quality school that folks really want to go to. And that's the pattern that we've seen across the country, is that you got to do it right. And doing it right means getting the right bodies in the building, but it also means paying attention to all of these other things. High teacher quality across the board, senses of belonging where everybody who shows up to the school, no matter what they look like, feels like they belong there, like they're welcome there. High attention to academics. Families across all races and backgrounds have one thing in common. They all want their children to be successful and they all want them to have really high quality academics. And so if you do it right, folks are really happy with it and kids end up doing better and they're prepared for life in the United States of America in 2021.
Super helpful. Nadia, I think this is a question for you, but feel free to pass the baton to one of your colleagues at the DOE if I'm wrong. My co-chair asked the question, is there research on why they are dropping out? And I'm presuming by they, he's referring to Asian American students, because that was one of the things that came up. Maybe you could speak to that demographic group specifically, but also just talk about in general, why do we see kids not succeed getting across the line with high school graduation?
I think I'm going to ask Sadye about the stat. I haven't seen that stat myself, and then perhaps Superintendent McGuire would be best to speak to achievement in schools.
Yeah, it's actually, I got it from the Coalition from Asian American Children and Families, CACF, which Nyah talked about earlier. And the interesting part about that question, Alan, is they actually want to know more about that stat, and that part of it is like disaggregating the data and what does that mean. And so the DOE and the state are actually in like long discussions around how to use home language or other markers to be able to really see what is actually happening, because you keep just hearing Asian, but it's a really blanket population. And so one, there's a need to do deeper dive on that data to really explain who we're talking about. So I appreciate that question. And then two, I think that in general, why we see folks drop out is, you know, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons, but, you know, disinterest and engagement. And I want to just bring it full circle to Nyah's and Stefan's point about when integration's done well. You can't just do public policy and not engage the public, especially on this. It's mission critical. So like some people say hearts and minds works, right? Nyah talked about community conversations, facilitated conversations, in small interactive workshops, not the DOE, you get 2 minutes and then like to shout into a mic and then nobody reacts to you or you don't hear from anybody for the next 40 years. So all of that is necessary. There has been an example in New York where we have changed policy to move towards a more controlled choice model, but seen our schools get more segregated 3 years later. And that's because we're not doing the like very deliberate, intentional community building, real relationships. We just did the sort of method of desegregation, and it needs nurturing. So I know that was circuitous, but it was full circle answer. Kelly, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I can just, I mean, so, you know, I was principal of a school that was very diverse and had a Asian population, mostly Chinese American, that hovered kind of between 30 or 35% by the time that I was, when I was there. And, you know, I have to say, this was a new thing for our school. Our school had been almost entirely Black and Latinx for the duration of its existence. And so we, when our school moved from one location to another, and we had a lot of research to do. And I was so thankful for the staff and parents who really helped us to engage groups of families in our school so that we could not just communicate, because you know, I don't speak Mandarin, but several of our staff members and families that we did engage with were able to do that for us. And through those conversations, we learned so much about ourselves, about the assumptions and biases that we had when thinking about the Asian community. I remember one time, you know, a question came up. There was this assumption that our Chinese American families wanted us to give more homework to the kids who were in our school. And the interview, the written poll results, and through the small group conversations, you know, revealed that they were exactly the same as our white, Black, and Latinx families. That some of them wanted more homework, some of them wanted less homework, and there wasn't really any kind of change there. I will say that there is a real challenge, or there was a real challenge for some of my Chinese American students who were not performing well. And it was very difficult for their families to engage with Department of Education and city services where there was not translation. And so, you know, translation and language access is a huge barrier for some families. And I'm not saying that that would have solved every situation, but that certainly is an ongoing struggle that is not where it needs to be yet.
Thank you. There's a couple of logistical questions that I think we might be able to answer pretty quickly, and I think they're going to you, Nadia, but again, please punt if someone else makes more sense. One is, when will offers be given to students for middle schools?
We don't have an exact timeline on that just yet. It'll be later this spring. Normally we have them in April, but that's in a much longer timeline. So expect just, in the next couple of months.
Helpful to have as much information as there is. Another question, this one came from Anat, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, Lubetsky. What does the district priority mean for the lottery? What does the neighborhood priority mean? Is there an automatic zone school as an option?
Sure. So the video that I had shared earlier actually gets into how priority groups overlap in the match. But district priority essentially means that kids who live or go to school in the district get in before any other applicants. And the goal of that is to ensure that students have access to schools in their neighborhoods. Not sure exactly what you mean by neighborhood priority, but it would generally be the district or zone that constitutes a neighborhood. And not everyone has a guaranteed zone school or lives within a zone for a school. You would be able to see that on your middle school application, or you could also go to, I will drop a link in the chat where you can look up what your zone schools are.
Thanks, Nadia. And then the next one I'm going to give you, there's a question at the beginning and then some commentary following it. So I'm just going to read exactly what was shared. This is a question coming from, again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, but I think it's Yelena Pavlovic. And the question is, for middle school admissions for fall 2022, do we know what will be the admission criteria? Current fourth grade students are supposed to be taking state tests next month that traditionally are used to determine their middle school admissions. These students have been significantly affected by the pandemic, given how young they are. Taking a test at age 9 while in a pandemic appears particularly challenging.
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely something that's on everyone's mind as we think about policies for the future. As Sadye said before, we don't know exactly what that will look like. We are very much in the midst of this process and are looking forward to seeing what the results are of this, to reevaluate what will happen next year, and to take into consideration situations exactly like what you're describing. We're in the middle of literally a worldwide pandemic, and it's going to make everything different, even if we want to stay the course.
And I'll just, reiterate what the Chancellor Carranza and now Chancellor Porter has said, which is, penalizing young people during this time is the last thing they want to do. And so I think that's going to be to all of us to sort of keep reiterating that that's a priority and that's important, but that's something certainly that we have said and we will keep saying because it's been a tremendously difficult time for our families.
And this will be the last question before we give our wonderful panelists a chance to share their final thoughts. This one comes from Elka Smith. I hear what is being said and appreciate the integration initiatives. Are there district or citywide initiatives that are also focused on fully shifting to culturally responsive, inclusive curriculums, ongoing anti-racism training for administrators and staff, and other mediums geared towards creating environments in all of our schools that will provide a positive and supportive experience in all of these schools as well? I think this has been touched on, but Sadye, do you mind taking that one? And then maybe Superintendent McGuire, if you could just talk specifically about what that looks like in District 2.
Sure. July of last year, the Panel for Educational Policy, who I mentioned that Elzora was once a part of, so shout out, passed a definition of what culturally responsive and sustaining education is. I wish we had a chat so I could see how many of you have seen it. If you haven't, I'll make sure to send it to Kit and to Jesse so that you guys can share it. But that was a really big step in sort of developing some language that cultural responsiveness is going to look different in every school. similar to what a community school is like, right? What the saying is, you've seen one community school, you've seen one community school. It's intentional that it's supposed to be reflective and adapt to the needs of specific school ecosystem. So cultural responsiveness will continue to be really important. The instructional leadership framework, which hasn't gotten that much play, but in essence, it's asking for the same thing, that a school leader knows every child well. The undergirding of the social emotional, both the trainings for our teachers to give them and their staff the support that they need, because they've been our essential workers. So we want to make sure that they feel supported, but also for our young people is going to be continuous. And again, so if you're not sort of socially, emotionally well, you know, it's really hard to show up to work, let alone to try to catch up with the academic learning loss. The other thing, the implicit bias trainings will continue to grow. And then I don't know where I saw this question. It's a long one, so I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. Other districts and citywide initiatives. And we are in development. So I mentioned that all of the districts that have either done some sort of diversity planning, have a NYCIP award, or are part of the district integration planning processes that are on pause due to COVID, we're developing a cohort, like a professional learning community, so that we can sort of advance integrating our system from a system-wide level, but know that each district's going to need different things, but we're trying to create sort of a citywide space so that superintendents and their leadership teams can be in exchange with one another about this, so that it's not as prescriptive as these are the things we're doing across every single district. Again, knowing that even that process is rooted in cultural responsiveness. But really the call will be for individual districts to create these diversity plans in consult with their community in an equitable community engagement process. But Central manages that. And I'm one of the people that sort of project manages all 14 districts in New York City right now that are doing some sort of integration planning in some way. So more to come on that, but that's like the big citywide push that I see coming. That was also a city council law that was passed last year that said New York City has to do and have a diversity plan in every district. So we're doing it because it's the right thing, but it's also city law, and also the mayor said we had to do it. And it's pretty fun. Kelly?
Yeah, I'll just talk about it really briefly, and I think that it starts with what Sadye mentioned in regards to knowing your students well. We, as parents, we want our children's teachers to know who we are, what we're made from, the languages we speak, the things that we value, our strengths and our weaknesses. And so it starts really with that, which is rooted in strong social emotional learning practices, both in deliberate spaces like morning meetings and advisories, but also built in instructional practices that teachers use in the classroom. The second thing is ensuring that our materials, books, resources that we're using to teach kids reflect the backgrounds from which they come, not just the cultural ethnic backgrounds, but also different experiences that kids have, different family formations. And then the third thing I think is around using race-focused or instructional practices, basically like teaching with race in mind, and really thinking about the students, ensuring that the teachers are using questioning and discussion, individual work, small group work, all kinds of different practices that are really developed with the lens of identity and race in mind. So that, in short, is what it is that we're going for, and what I think that we'll see through implementation of the state integration grant.
Thank you. 8:30 is rapidly approaching, and I promised everyone that we would end on time. So we're going to shift gears and hear from each of the panelists, just a minute-long closeout. The prompt is, where should we go from here in terms of admissions policy, in terms of improving outcomes and experiences for all students, specifically in terms of continuing to desegregate our school system. You can answer one of those, all of those, or you can talk about something totally different because I'm not going to cut you off. But let's go in reverse alphabetical order by first name. So we're going to start with Stefan, and then I'll cue the next person, and then we'll close things out.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me here. This has been a great conversation. I think I would just close by saying, reiterating what I said before, which is there's an incredible diversity in District 2, and I think there's such an opportunity to embrace it and to think about what's possible. I think it's going to require folks coming together and having conversations with one another, but it's going to require interrogating some assumptions that I think come up a lot. One of those assumptions is that education is a zero-sum game, that there have to be winners and losers, and that's just not the case. You can create an incredible, community-wide set of schools in District 2 that are both diverse and high quality, that folks would be really excited to send their kids to. And I think that needs to be the assumption that you enter the conversation with, not the opposite, that there's only a certain amount of good schools that there will ever be, and that there will be winners and losers, because that's not a way to really enter in those types of conversations. The second thing I would say is to really interrogate the notion of school quality. What makes a high quality school? Because we know a lot of segregation is really driven by perceptions that have just built on each other over time. So what is it that communities in District 2 want out of their schools on a really nitty gritty level? And how are you going to get there together? And then finally, embrace this opportunity of, this is a year that's going to look very different than years in the past. And it's going to yield some really important data, and enter conversations about what the future looks like with an open mind, based on the fact that this has been really an unprecedented year. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you all so much for having me. It's been a pleasure being here.
Thank you, sir. Sadie, you're up next.
Well, first, good public policy can't be made without the public. And so Community Board 4, you play an enormous role in that. I want you to keep getting people involved. I can come back and facilitate. I can come back and train facilitators if you guys want to hold these kind of community conversations and come back to the department with recommendations. Some people call it hearts and minds work, but it really is, it does need to move in tandem with the policy making. And when that happens, really good things can come. We have great examples from that across the city, and specifically in District 15 and 13, like you had mentioned. The other thing is the Rucker Johnson really, for those of you who don't follow him, lays out a pretty powerful framework for a more perfect public education system. And that is, of course, equitably funding our schools, which I think we can all get behind. Powerful, strong, present early childhood, which was the hallmark of the de Blasio administration, and which will continue because it's so important, right? Pre-K and now even 3K. And then third, integrating our schools, right? And that we can't have this more perfect public school system if it's a segregated system. It's just not it. So we got to experiment towards it. And the fourth that he doesn't mention, but I like to add in, which is community schools. We have levers, we have models of schools that are beyond just the wraparound services, but that really practice cultural responsiveness, high expectations for our young people, academic rigor, a celebration of diversity, and we have models for this. And so when we, as Department of Education officials, come to you and say, equity and excellence, and we really mean it, I think it's important that you hear that we're not talking about eliminating what the great practices are at our screen schools. We're not saying let's get rid of that, right? I went to New York City Lab School as a middle schooler, and I graduated from there as high school. There's some wonderful practices there. And again, I think the first of which is that every single teacher expected a lot of me. Every single one of my peers expected a lot of me, right? College lists were something to boast about. Now, there's a lot of social science behind why and the who, and it was segregated, yeah. But the idea that we hold our kids to high expectations, that we want them to perform high, that they're reading this, that they're reading that we're talking about all different types of authors and artists and have access to those materials to do that and playing sports. That's what we want to see. That's what got me in education, my own personal experience. So we can do that. We can experiment towards this more perfect public school education system, but we can't do it if we're going to be segregated and be committed to segregation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Nyah, you're up next.
Thanks. Yeah, first, thank you for having us here. This has been a really fruitful and great conversation. And if I have anything to add, I think it's also what folks have talked about is I hope that for the future, we can start to move away from the scarcity model that has been part of the New York City education system, that we have to consistently fight over crumbs to be able to have the quality and that, again, equity and excellence goes hand in hand. I don't want crumbs. And I know it is possible to be able to create a better system that attends to all students. And it is, even though this might be infuriating for some people, it is not an either or conversation. It is a yes and we can truly make it that way. I think whenever I do this work, I always think of the Malcolm X quote that's actually America preaches integration and practices segregation, and how much I want to reverse that, right? And I think that there's showings in District 2 with the state integration plan and how many schools participate in the diversity and admissions programs within District 2 that there's efforts to really start about practicing integration that are already underway. And let's continue to invert that, right? Let's continue to talk about integration, but also practice what we're preaching in the same space. And I think that there's changes that have been made to sustain that thinking, and I think we can improve upon it even more. And so I'm excited and hopeful always about this work and where it can go. And again, offering facilitation, having these discussions, you know, what you might need. If I can't do it, there are so many networks and connections that can. And so helpful to be part of that as you guys move forward.
Thank you, ma'am. Mercedes, and then Superintendent McGuire, you'll close us out.
Thank you so much for all the panelists for being here, because I think parents really needed this information, and I am looking forward to continuing to work with you guys on Community Board 4 to try to implement some of these changes.
I just want to say thank you. It's I mentioned at the start of this that I hadn't been in this role for very long, but it is awfully empowering, and I feel a great deal of support being a part of a panel like this, and knowing that your voices are out there, and hearing people, you know, talk about the vision that they see for our district. It's pretty amazing to know. For many years in District 2, it often felt like the voices of some were not heard. The voices of those who were interested in looking at more diverse schooling, looking at integration, were not heard. But you clearly made it known that there are some loud and proud voices out there, and I'm looking forward to the next few years and seeing all that we can do. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Nadia, anything that you wanted to share?
I think I'm just grateful to be here, and we often don't hear from communities enough. I'm not like Sadye. I don't luckily get to be around people who work outside the system that often. So I think it's always a good experience for us, and I'm always left reflecting on a lot of what I hear and sharing it with my colleagues. So your voice really does have an impact and matters to us a lot. So thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And it is 8:30, so I will try to be as quick as I possibly can be here. Massive thank you to our panelists and also to my colleagues on the community board who helped put this event together. I learned a lot. I hope others did as well. We are going to pick up this conversation likely at our next meeting and discuss how we want to process what we've heard and put it into action. I'll just say on a personal level, as a former teacher, former principal and current parent of a 4-year-old and a 3-month-old. What was talked about today is, very, very critical to the future of our city, the future of every single young person who's going to go through our school system. And so I just appreciate all of you engaging in what can be a tricky conversation, but is absolutely an essential one. And I hope that this is the first of many that we all get to have together. I'll leave it there. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. And please come back to our next meeting.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.